On the coldest night of the year, a quiet man in a rusted pickup truck spots a pregnant girl huddled on the roadside, shivering and alone. He doesn't ask where she's from or why she's there. He just opens his door. That single act of kindness sets off a chain of events neither of them could have imagined: a newborn life, a found family, and a second chance neither dared hope for. In a world that often turns away, this story reminds us what it means to stay, to shelter, and to love without condition. If you believe compassion still matters and that some doors should always open, stay with us. This is a story you won't forget. The snow had been falling since before sunset, soft at first, then thick and determined, covering the roads and rooftops in heavy silence. Grayfield was the kind of town that slowed down when the weather came. People got quiet, lights dimmed early, roads emptied. But Liam Bernard wasn't home yet. He was driving his truck up the narrow mountain road, fingers tight on the steering wheel wipers clicking against the windshield as they tried and failed to keep up with the storm. The heater wheezed, working hard to push lukewarm air through the vents, but the cold still crept in around the seams. He rubbed his gloved hand over his mouth and exhaled slowly. He wasn't nervous exactly, just tired. It had been a long day fixing someone's antique wall clock, and the muscles in his back reminded him he wasn't as young as he used to be. His daughter Mabel would be waiting for him, probably curled up on the couch with her flashlight and a stack of drawings, pretending not to worry. As the truck climbed the last hill before the road curved toward his cabin, Liam leaned forward and narrowed his eyes. The night had thickened. Headlights only reached a few feet before the darkness swallowed them. That's when he saw it. A shape dark, unmoving, just off the shoulder of the road. At first, it looked like a bag of trash, maybe a fallen deer, but then it shifted. Liam hit the brakes. The tires crunched over packed snow, skidding a little before stopping. He reversed slowly, backing up until the headlights caught the figure in full. It was a girl. No, a young woman, sitting hunched in the snow, knees to her chest, arms wrapped tight around them. Her coat looked too thin for the weather. Her hair hung in tangled snow-dusted strands over her face, and as the light caught her from the side, Liam's stomach dropped. She was pregnant. The round curve of her belly was obvious, even beneath the oversized sweatshirt stretched tight across her middle. He stayed in the truck for a beat, heart steady, but something low in his chest stirred. He glanced at the clock. It was past 6. No one else would be out here tonight. Just him and her and the snow. Liam opened the door. The wind slapped against him, sharp and wet, and his boots crunched into the road as he stepped out. He didn't get too close. Not yet. "You all right?" he asked, voice even, but clear through the cold. The girl flinched, didn't answer. She didn't look up. Her shoulders trembled in quick, shallow bursts. Her lips were blue at the edges. "Hey," he said again, a little louder now. "You hurt?" "I'm fine," she said quietly. The voice was rough, barely above a whisper. She didn't look fine. Liam took another step closer. He could see her face better now, young, pale, not more than 18. Her eyes were red around the edges, not just from the cold, but from something older, deeper. "You're not fine," he replied, not unkindly. "You'll freeze out here." I said, "I'm fine." She didn't have anger in her voice, just exhaustion, the kind that settled deep in the bones. Liam stood still for a moment, weighing her words. He'd learned not to interfere with people's messes, not since Ellen died, not since he'd had to become both father and mother to Mabel and keep their world quiet, contained, predictable. But something about this girl, this child, really wouldn't let him walk away. Maybe it was the cold, maybe it was her eyes, or maybe it was the simple fact that he wouldn't be able to sleep tonight, knowing he'd left her here. "I've got a cabin not far from here," he said. His voice was steady calm. "It's warm. There's food. You can stay the night. Leave in the morning if you want, but I'm not driving off and pretending I didn't see you." The girl finally looked up. Her eyes met his gray-blue, sharp but guarded. Her mouth stayed tight. She said nothing. But after a long pause, she gave a single nod. Liam let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He reached a hand down to her. She didn't take it, but she tried to stand. Her knees buckled slightly, and he caught her by the elbow gently. She was light, frighteningly light. He helped her into the truck, closed the door behind her, then climbed back in on the driver's side. Inside, the air was barely warmer than outside, but she pulled her coat tighter and pressed back against the seat, shivering. "You got a name?" he asked as he started driving again. She didn't look at him. "Camellia," she said after a beat. "Pretty name," he said. "I'm Liam." She gave a small nod but said nothing else. They drove the next 5 minutes in silence, the truck crawling carefully along the snow-covered road. Liam glanced at her once or twice. Her hands were tucked beneath her arms. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, like looking anywhere else might undo her. When they pulled into the gravel drive in front of the cabin, the headlights washed over a small wood-framed home tucked among bare trees. A soft glow from the front window flickered. Mabel had left the fire going. Liam Park shut off the engine and stepped out. He circled to her side and opened the door. Camelia hesitated, then climbed out slowly, one hand on her belly. She followed him up the steps, tracking snow behind her, and paused at the threshold. Liam turned to her and said, "You're safe here, I promise." Inside, the warmth hit her first, not much, but enough to sting. The smell of burning wood cinnamon and something faintly citrus hung in the air. Mabel was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a sketch pad open on her lap, and a flashlight still dimly glowing beside her. Liam gently picked up the pad and flashlight, set them aside, and tucked the blanket tighter around his daughter. Camelia stood near the door, dripping melted snow onto the floor. Her arms were still wrapped around herself. Liam gestured to the small kitchen area. "There's soup on the stove. I'll get you a towel." She nodded. Her eyes scanned the room, like she was waiting for someone to stop her. No one did. Liam handed her a clean towel and watched as she dried her face and hands. She didn't ask where the bathroom was. She didn't ask anything at all. When he handed her a bowl of soup, she held it like it was something she hadn't seen in weeks. She ate quietly, slowly. Each spoonful looked like it took effort, but she didn't stop. After she finished, Liam cleared the bowl and said, "You can sleep upstairs. It's not much, but it's warm. Bathroom's down the hall." She stared at him for a long second, then said softly, "Thank you." Liam nodded. "You're welcome." He turned to walk toward the fireplace, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" Camelia tensed. He kept his voice gentle. "What were you doing out there in the cold?" That far from town, Camelia lowered her eyes. She rubbed her hands over the towel again, even though they were dry. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, voice even, but low. "I left. Home wasn't safe." Liam waited. "My mom said I was trash," she added flatly. "My dad said I embarrassed him. They told me not to come back. So I didn't." Liam didn't press. He didn't need the rest. Not tonight. He just nodded once slowly. "You can stay," he said, "as long as you need." And for the first time since she stepped into the house, Camelia exhaled. The snow hadn't let up overnight. By morning it had covered the trees, the porch railing, and the road outside like a thick, unbroken sheet. The world beyond the windows was colorless, quiet, and still. Inside the cabin, the only sounds came from the steady hiss of the old kettle on the stove and the occasional soft crackle of firewood settling in the hearth. Liam Bernard stood in the kitchen, barefoot and quiet, his shoulders relaxed in a way that didn't happen often. He moved slowly, deliberately pouring 2 mugs of tea. One was for him, as always. The second he placed on the small table by the window, just across from the stairs. It was meant for Camelia, though she hadn't asked for anything and hadn't said much the night before. He didn't expect conversation. He only believed in small, consistent acts. Sometimes that was enough to tell a person they were safe. He stood at the stove for a while longer, listening to the wind press against the window panes, watching the way the light from the fire threw soft shadows across the floor. He thought about the girl upstairs, about her face when she looked up at him for the first time, half frozen and halfway gone, about how she hadn't asked for help, but hadn't pushed it away either. That kind of hurt, the quiet kind, didn't heal quickly. He'd seen it before in himself, in others. He wasn't going to fix her life. That wasn't the deal. He just couldn't leave her in the snow. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Mabel stood in the doorway, wrapped in her blanket hair, wild from sleep, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. She was small for her age, but sharp and intuitive in ways that caught people off guard. She wasn't the kind of kid who asked a lot of questions, not because she didn't want to know, but because she understood when to wait. She looked up at him and blinked. "Is she still here?" Liam nodded once. "She's upstairs, sleeping." "Is she okay?" "I think so. Tired. Cold." Mabel didn't say anything else right away. She walked past him to the fire, sat cross-legged on the rug, and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Liam handed her a fresh pair of wool socks. She took them with a small smile and started tugging them on. "She's gonna stay. For a little while, Liam said, just until she figures some things out. She doesn't look very old. She's not. Is she going to have the baby here? Liam hesitated, then said, I don't know yet. Mabel accepted that like she accepted most things with a quiet kind of logic. She didn't try to force clarity where there wasn't any. Instead, she reached for her sketch pad and began to draw. Her pencil scratched softly against the paper, quick strokes forming shapes only she understood. Liam left her there and turned back to the stove, flipping the switch on the old toaster and pulling out the skillet to start on breakfast. Upstairs, the floor creaked gently. Liam glanced toward the staircase but didn't say anything. A few moments later, Camelia appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing the gray sweater Liam had left outside the guest room door, sleeves too long, hem brushing her thighs. Her hair was brushed back, still damp at the ends, and she held the railing tightly with one hand as she made her way down one step at a time, careful with the added weight of her belly. When she reached the bottom step, she paused. Mabel looked up, eyes wide, but not unkind. There was a beat of silence. Camelia stood still. Shoulders a little tense, face unreadable. Liam spoke first. Morning. There's tea on the table if you want it. Camelia nodded slightly and walked over. She took the mug in both hands, her fingers curled around the warmth, and lowered herself into the chair without a word. Mabel watched her, then glanced at her sketchpad, then back again. She slid the paper across the rug, inching it toward Camelia. This is you, Mabel said simply, and the baby. Camelia blinked surprised. She looked down at the drawing. Two stick figures, one taller with a round belly and long hair, the other smaller with a red heart drawn above them both. It was messy and sweet and unexpected. Thanks, Camelia said, her voice cracking slightly on the word. Mabel grinned, pleased with herself, and went back to drawing. Liam set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table in front of Camelia. She hesitated for a second before picking up the fork. She ate slowly, cautiously at first, like she wasn't sure how long the meal would last, or whether it was really meant for her. Liam didn't press. He moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, making another plate for Mabel, another for himself, letting the normal sounds of breakfast fill the room. It wasn't much, just a Thursday morning in a cabin in the woods. But for Camelia, it was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Ordinary, safe. When they finished eating, Liam cleared the plates without asking, rinsed them in the sink, and left them in the drying rack. Camelia stayed seated watching him. Her posture was less rigid now. Her hands had stopped shaking. Mabel moved to the fireplace, arranging small sticks near the hearth, pretending to build a campfire of her own. Liam leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. How'd you sleep? Camelia looked over at him. Her eyes were tired, but more focused than the night before. Better than I thought I would. You hungry for more? She shook her head. That was good. Thank you. He nodded. The silence returned not awkward, but heavy with all the things neither of them had figured out how to say. Finally, she cleared her throat. Your daughter, she said quietly. She's sweet. She's tough. Liam replied. Smart. She misses her mom a lot. Camelia's expression softened, but she didn't ask. She didn't need to. I didn't mean to bring trouble, she said after a long pause. I wasn't trying to show up on anyone's doorstep. I just didn't have anywhere else to go. Liam studied her face, the way she looked down when she spoke, like the truth still cost her something. You didn't bring trouble, he said. You brought a heartbeat. That's not nothing. Camelia swallowed hard. She looked at Mabel again, who was now drawing flames on her pretend fire with a red crayon. Are you sure it's okay if I stay just for a few days? Liam pushed off the counter and stood straight. As long as you need, he said simply. She nodded, and for the first time since she arrived, her shoulders dropped just a little. Not completely, not all the way, but enough to mean something. Liam glanced toward the window. The snow was still coming down steady as ever. He turned back to Camelia. If you want later on, I can show you around the place. Just the basics. Bathroom pipes are finicky when it gets this cold. She gave a faint smile. Okay. Mabel stood suddenly, hands on her hips. Can we build a snowman? Liam raised an eyebrow. Later, once the wind calms down. Mabel huffed, but not in protest. It was part of the rhythm, part of their mornings. Camelia watched them both, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not quite recognition, not quite envy. Just the beginning of a realization that maybe this wasn't temporary. Maybe there was something here she hadn't expected to find. Not just warmth, not just food, but space. A pause from the chaos. She sipped her tea again. Still warm. The fire crackled. Mabel returned to her drawing. Liam sat down in his chair and reached for the newspaper, thumbing through the pages like he had 100 mornings before. Camelia didn't move. She just sat there wrapped in a borrowed sweater, holding a borrowed mug, surrounded by two strangers who hadn't asked anything of her except to stay. The wind had changed by late afternoon. Liam felt at first a sharper bite in the air, the kind of cold that slipped past layers and settled straight into your bones. He stepped onto the porch with a mug of tea in hand and eyes narrowing toward the tree line. The clouds had sunk low over Grayfield, heavy and flat, dragging the sky closer to the earth. Snow had begun falling again, thicker now, drifting in sideways sheets. Liam knew that kind of weather. It wasn't just winter, it was a warning. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady and low. Mabel was stretched out on the rug with her sketchpad humming something under her breath while she drew. Camelia sat in the armchair, one hand resting on her belly, the other holding a paperback she hadn't turned a page of in over 10 minutes. Her eyes moved, but her focus wasn't on the book. Every few minutes, her face twitched just slightly. Liam noticed. He didn't say anything at first. He just watched. When he set down his empty mug and walked toward the woodpile near the fireplace, he asked casual but pointed, "Your back hurting?" Camelia startled slightly, then shook her head a little too quickly. "No, just, I think she's moving a lot today." Liam didn't push. Not yet. He tossed 2 more logs into the fire and brushed his hands off, but he kept an eye on her. An hour passed, then 2. The sky outside darkened into an almost blue-black. The snow was falling fast now, covering the porch in a matter of minutes. Camelia shifted again, this time with a low grunt. Liam looked over just in time to see her hand grip the armrest. Her knuckles had gone pale. "Camelia," he said, crossing the room, "is it starting?" She didn't answer right away. Her jaw was clenched. Then she exhaled slowly, eyes wide and damp. "I think so," she said, "but maybe it's just Braxton Hicks. It could stop." Liam crouched beside her. "How far apart are they?" She shook her head. "I wasn't timing. I didn't want to panic." He stood fast, grabbed his coat from the hook. "I'm going to get someone." "You can't." Her voice rose as she tried to sit forward. "It's coming down too hard. You said so yourself. I can try." Liam said, already halfway to the door. "There's an old midwife lives near the gas station. If I can get to the truck." But when he opened the door, the wind slammed into the cabin like a fist. Snow blew in sideways, the world outside gone to white. He stood there for a second, blinking against the cold, before slamming it shut again. "No way I'm making it up the road in this," he muttered. Camelia groaned again, louder this time, and Liam's heart jumped in his chest. He turned to Mabel, who was now watching with wide eyes. "Go to your room, sweetheart. Get your flashlight, stay under the covers, just for a little while." Mabel opened her mouth to ask, but Liam cut her off gently. "She's going to have the baby. I need you to be brave." The girl nodded, grabbed her flashlight and sketchpad, and darted upstairs. Liam shut the door behind her, then turned back to Camelia. She was on her feet now, barely gripping the back of the chair with both hands. "I can't do this," she whispered, tears forming fast. "Not here. Not like this." "You can," Liam said, voice low and firm. "We don't have a choice. And you are not alone." The next hour blurred. Liam boiled water, laid out towels, did his best to remember what he had read years ago when Ellen was pregnant. Camelia was on the couch at first, then on the floor, then finally in the guest bed, sweating and shaking and gripping the sheets like they were her only tether. Liam moved around her like a storm himself, filling a basin, wiping her brow, counting her breathing, steadying her shoulders when the pain peaked. He was terrified, absolutely, but he didn't let it show. Camelia screamed once low and guttural, and he felt it down to his spine. "You're doing good," he kept saying. "You're doing just fine." She grabbed his wrist during a contraction so hard he winced. "What if something goes wrong? Then we deal with it," Liam said, eyes steady on hers. One breath at a time. The snow howled outside, but the louder storm was in that room. And then, after what felt like forever, the air split open with a sharp, clear cry. Liam caught the baby in his hands, wet and squirming and impossibly small. He wrapped her in a towel and looked at Camelia, who was crying now, but differently. Exhausted, relieved, alive. "She's here," he said. Camelia reached out with shaking arms. He placed the baby against her chest. "Hi, baby," she murmured, forehead to forehead. "Hi, Rachel." Liam stepped back, sat heavily in the chair by the door, and finally let himself breathe. The storm still beat against the windows, But in that room, there was only the warmth of a mother, the breath of a newborn, and the heart of a man who had done something he never thought he could. And he had done it for someone he hadn't known just 2 nights ago. That was enough to quiet the fear for now. The days after Rachel's birth passed slowly, wrapped in a kind of hush that felt both tender and uncertain. The storm had quieted by the next morning, but snow still blanketed the trees outside the windows and piled high along the porch railing. Inside the cabin, time seemed to stretch not in boredom, but in the way quiet moments tend to do when something new has entered your life and changed its rhythm without asking. Liam woke early each day not because he had to, but because he couldn't quite sleep past dawn anymore. His body was tired, but his mind didn't settle the way it used to. He would get up, stoke the fire, and boil water for tea before the sun broke through the clouds. He noticed on the 3rd morning that Camelia was already up before him. She was sitting at the table, hair pulled back in a loose braid, Rachel cradled in one arm, while the other hand scribbled quietly into a spiral-bound notebook. There was a steadiness to her movements, now not confident exactly, but purposeful. She didn't notice Liam at first, and he didn't interrupt. He just watched her for a moment, then poured water into the kettle like always, and reached for 2 mugs. She glanced up when she heard him moving, and he offered a small nod. She nodded back, the kind of acknowledgement people give when they're too tired to talk, but still grateful not to be alone. Later that morning, Liam stepped out to shovel the porch steps while Mabel sat curled in the armchair near the fireplace, flipping through an old picture book. Camelia was in the kitchen, swaying gently as she held Rachel against her chest, humming something faint that Liam couldn't place. It wasn't a song exactly, just a sound, soft, circular, soothing. By the 5th day, they had settled into a quiet rhythm. Camelia rose early often before Liam and took over small tasks without being asked. She washed dishes after breakfast, folded laundry, and warmed bottles with a kind of cautious efficiency. Liam noticed she always looked around before doing something like waiting for permission, though none was needed. He never stopped her, and he never told her to do more. Mabel, curious but cautious, began watching Camelia closely. One afternoon she approached while Camelia sat by the fire bouncing Rachel in her lap. Without saying anything, Mabel handed over a folded piece of paper, a drawing like the others she was always making. This one showed 4 stick figures, a man with big hands, a little girl with curly hair, a baby with a halo of yellow, and a taller girl with a round belly standing in the middle. Camelia opened the drawing carefully. She looked at Mabel, whose face was serious, but not afraid. "That's us," Mabel said. Camelia blinked hard and smiled. It was small, but real. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mabel sat down beside her without a word. Later that evening, when Mabel had gone to bed, and the cabin was filled only with the gentle ticking of the old mantel clock and the low hiss of the fire, Camelia sat across from Liam in the living room, notebook on her lap, but no pen in hand. The quiet had become easier between them, less about awkwardness and more about peace. After a long stretch of silence, Camelia looked up. Her voice was soft but steady. What happened to her mom? Liam didn't speak right away. He looked at the fire instead, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Cancer. It was fast. Mabel was 7. She remembers some of it, but not the worst part. Camelia nodded slowly. Her hand rested gently on Rachel's blanket as the baby slept. "I'm sorry," she said. Liam gave a small shrug. "Thank you." A moment passed before she said, "I don't know if I'll be any good at this." Her eyes didn't meet his. Her voice wasn't self-pitying, just honest. "I'm scared I'll break her, that I'll mess everything up." Liam sat back. "You won't." She looked at him, then eyes uncertain. "How do you know?" He paused. "Because you stayed." That night, Camelia placed her notebook back into the wooden box by the hearth. She didn't write anything new. She just held it for a moment, hands resting on the lid like it meant something more now. And it did. Not just a place for letters to her daughter. It had become something else entirely. Proof that she was still here, that she hadn't disappeared. The next morning, Liam found her swaddling Rachel in a blanket he hadn't seen in years, one Ellen had made when Mabel was born, kept folded at the bottom of an old cedar chest. Camelia didn't know that. She had just found it and used it, and somehow it felt right. He stood in the doorway watching her, something tightening in his chest. Not pain exactly, just a kind of memory that lived too close to the surface. He didn't say anything. He just went to the kitchen and made breakfast like usual. And when he set a plate down for her, she looked up and smiled without being asked. The snow had begun to soften by the end of the 2nd week. It no longer fell in harsh sheets, but drifted gently thin and almost delicate, like the storm had finally decided to rest. Inside the cabin, the fire kept burning, and the kettle hissed its familiar rhythm. Camelia had taken to waking earlier than anyone else, sitting quietly near the window, with Rachel in her arms, her notebook beside her, but untouched most mornings. She seemed steadier now, less afraid, but there was still a certain alertness in the way she carried herself, like she was always waiting for something to go wrong. Liam noticed it, but he didn't pry. He believed in giving people space, even when they didn't ask for it. That morning, just after breakfast, there was a knock at the door. Not the wind, not the creak of the walls, but a real solid knock. Liam stood up, wiped his hands on a towel, and opened it. Standing on the porch was Daniel Jesse, his neighbor from half a mile down the road, bundled in a thick brown coat, a knit cap pulled low over his ears, and a plastic bag in one hand. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Brought some kindling," Daniel said. "Figured you might be burning through it faster now." Liam nodded. "Appreciate it. Come in for a minute. Wind's still mean." Daniel stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. His eyes scanned the room briefly. Camelia was at the kitchen counter with Rachel in her arms, bouncing gently, humming low. Mabel sat at the table with a box of crayons. Daniel gave a short nod toward Camelia. "She yours." Liam's jaw moved, but his voice stayed calm. "No, she's hers. They're staying here a while." Daniel looked at him for a moment, then shrugged. "Folks in town been talking. Said they saw you in the general store last week, buying baby formula. Said you're housing a white girl with a baby that ain't yours." Liam didn't react right away. He took the kindling, stacked it by the fireplace, then turned back. "People in town should mind their own business." Daniel chuckled, but it was dry. "You know how it goes. Small town. People notice things, start asking questions. I'm not hiding anything," Liam said. "I did what any decent man would do." Daniel leaned against the doorframe. "Not everyone sees it that way. You're a black man. She's a white girl barely grown with a baby. Some folks gonna say what they're gonna say." Liam's shoulders tightened, but he kept his voice level. "Those people weren't out there in the snow. They didn't see what I saw. And they sure as hell ain't here changing diapers or warming bottles." There was a pause. Daniel shifted his weight. "I'm not saying I agree with them. Just be careful. World don't always give folks like you the benefit of the doubt." Liam met his eyes, and for a moment neither man said anything more. Then Daniel nodded, once turned, and let himself out the door, shutting behind him with a soft click. Camelia hadn't said a word through the whole exchange, but her face was pale. She bounced Rachel a little faster, then stopped and set the baby in her bassinet with trembling hands. "Did he mean what I think he meant?" Liam looked at her expression, unreadable. "Yeah, he did." Her eyes filled with panic. "What if someone reports us, says I'm unfit, says you're doing something wrong just by helping?" He stepped closer. "Then we deal with it. We do what needs doing, like we've been doing." "But what if they take her?" Camelia's voice cracked. "What if they show up and say I can't keep her because I'm here because I'm with you?" Liam's voice softened. "They won't. You're her mother. You're doing everything right." Camelia shook her head, backing away. "I don't have a job. I don't have a home. I'm living in a cabin with a man I barely know, and now the whole town's whispering about it." Liam didn't move. Let them whisper. But she wasn't hearing him anymore. Her breath came faster, shallow and sharp. She picked up the dishcloth from the counter and started wiping the same spot over and over, her hand shaking. That night, after Mabel had gone to bed and the house had gone still, Liam sat beside the fire with a book he never turned the page on. Across the room, Camelia sat curled on the edge of the couch, staring into the flames, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Rachel was asleep in her bassinet. The silence stretched thick and tense. Finally, she spoke. "I'm scared." Liam set the book down. "I know. I don't want to lose her." "You won't." Her eyes filled with tears. "They could twist it, make it look like I abandoned her, like I'm unstable. I don't even have custody papers or anything." Liam leaned forward. "Camelia, you're doing everything a mother is supposed to do. You stayed. You care for her. You put her first. That's more than a lot of kids ever get." She looked down, voice barely a whisper. "I don't feel like enough. You're more than enough." The next morning, Mabel handed Camelia a drawing without saying a word. It showed Rachel sleeping between two arms, one dark, one light. A small heart floated above. Camelia traced the crayon lines with her fingers, her hand pausing halfway. Mabel said almost too quietly to hear, "She's already ours. Nobody gets to change that." Camellia pulled her close, hugged her tight. No one said anything else, but it was enough to hold off the fear for one more day. The sun finally broke through after days of gray, casting long, thin beams of light across the snow-covered clearing behind the cabin. It was the kind of morning that made everything seem a little softer, even if the air still bit at your cheeks. Mabel was already bundled up in 2 sweaters, her pink scarf hanging lopsided as she stomped through the snow in her boots. She looked back at Camellia, who stood hesitating just outside the door, arms crossed over her borrowed coat. "Come on," Mabel shouted. "I'll show you how to make a snow angel." Camellia smiled faintly, not quite ready to move. But something about the girl's insistence and the way her footprints scattered across the yard without hesitation pushed her forward. She stepped into the snow, slow at first, boots crunching with each movement. Mabel dropped onto her back in the middle of the clearing, flailing her arms and legs with practiced ease, her laughter high and bright in the cold air. "You have to do it with me," she called. Camellia stared at her for a long second, unsure, then finally lowered herself down into the snow. It was colder than she expected, seeping through the thick layers, and she gasped at the chill. Then she looked up. The sky was a clear, endless blue, and the branches overhead were laced with frost like silver veins. Without thinking, she started moving her arms and legs, imitating Mabel, and somewhere in the middle of it, a laugh escaped her lips. Not a polite chuckle, a real laugh, loud, sudden, completely unguarded. It startled her. She hadn't laughed like that in years. Not since before everything had gone wrong. Not since before she started walking around like she owed everyone an apology for existing. In that moment, lying in the snow next to a child who didn't see her as broken, Camellia felt something lift from her chest. Not all of it, but enough to breathe. Liam watched from the edge of the porch, arms crossed loosely, leaning against the post. His face was calm, but his eyes carried something deeper, something close to pride. He didn't say anything. He just watched her laugh and didn't look away. That night, the fire crackled low in the hearth, and the house was wrapped in quiet warmth. Mabel had gone to bed early, tired from the day's play. Liam sat in his usual chair with a book open on his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Across from him, Camellia sat on the floor near the fireplace, her notebook in her lap pen between her fingers, but unmoving. For a long while, neither of them said anything. It was not an uncomfortable silence, but it was heavy with something unspoken. Then Camellia looked up. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Would you mind if I read one?" Liam blinked surprised. He closed his book and set it aside. "No, go ahead." Camellia opened the notebook and thumbed through the pages until she found one marked with a small folded corner. She smoothed the crease and began reading aloud. "Dear Rachel, today I wanted to disappear. I sat on a park bench for hours watching people walk by, wondering what it would feel like to be invisible. Then a woman dropped her mitten. It was small, red, and knitted, almost silly. I picked it up and handed it to her. She smiled at me, said thank you like I mattered. I held on to that smile all day. You'll have days like this when the world feels too big and too empty, but I hope you remember even small kindness can anchor you. It did for me today. Love, Mom." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes glistened. She didn't look up when she finished. Liam let the silence stretch a moment, letting the words settle. "That's a good one," he said. Camellia closed the notebook gently. "It's one of the first I wrote, back when I was still pretending I had a plan." He waited. "I used to be the pride of my family," she said after a while. "Honor roll, good manners, college bound, the kind of daughter they showed off at church." She drew in a breath. "Then I got pregnant by some guy at school. He was charming, good-looking, said all the right things. Until I told him. Then he told me I was a mistake, that I'd ruined his future. Then he told everyone else." Liam didn't speak. He didn't need to. "My mom called me a disgrace, said I humiliated the family. My dad didn't even look at me, just left the room like I wasn't there. And after a while, I started to believe them. I started to wonder if they were right." Liam's voice was low. "They were wrong. I can tell you that much." Camellia looked over at him. Her expression wasn't fragile. It was steady, worn, but standing. "No one's ever said that to me," she whispered. "Well, he said. It's about time someone did." There were no tears, no dramatic pauses, just two people sharing a room afire and the weight of things they couldn't carry alone anymore. Later that night, after Camellia had gone upstairs and the baby's soft breathing had settled into the quiet, Liam remained by the fire. He sat for a long while, the flames flickering across his face. The wooden box where Camelia kept her letters rested beside the hearth. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached out and placed his hand gently on the lid. Just sat there, like that, his fingers brushing the grain of the wood, steady and light. In the firelight, his face looked older, tired, but there was a calm there too. The kind that comes from knowing you've done something right, even if no one sees it, even if no one says thank you. Sometimes being there was enough. Sometimes staying was the only answer that mattered. The days grew a little longer. The light outside held on past 5, casting a soft gold across the trees and into the corners of the cabin where dust motes floated in slow, lazy spirals. The worst of the storm season had passed, though there were still nights when the cold bit at the windows hard enough to make the fire hiss and pop like it didn't want to be alone. Inside, life had settled into a rhythm that wasn't perfect, but it was steady. Camelia and Rachel had made a place for themselves, and Liam, without saying much, had begun to wonder how long borrowed rooms could keep feeling like enough. It started with a glance. One night, Liam passed the guest room Camelia had been using since her first evening there. The door was open. Inside, the floor was cluttered diaper bag tipped over folded clothes. In a pile, a basket with bottles and wipes tucked into a corner. Rachel's bassinet sat near the wall, wedged between a dresser and the end of the bed. Camelia was sitting on the edge of the mattress, shoulders slumped, scribbling quietly into her notebook with the baby asleep beside her. She didn't notice him looking, and he didn't linger, but the sight stayed with him. The next morning, after everyone had gone quiet again, Liam walked to the far end of the hall and opened the door to the room he hadn't touched in over a year. It was his old workshop. Dust clung to everything. Shelves lined with forgotten tools, half-assembled clock parts, jars of screws and gears and brass hinges. The air smelled like oil and pine, and something else stale but familiar. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just breathing, then rolled up his sleeves and began. He didn't tell anyone. He worked in pieces in quiet hours. During the day, he watched Camelia learn how to cradle Rachel with one arm while stirring a pot with the other. He saw her brush Mabel's hair in the mornings, patient and gentle, laughing when the curls bounced back into place. At night, after they had all gone to bed, he slipped into the back room and scraped old paint from the windowsills, measured new panels for shelving, and swept the floor until the dust no longer rose in clouds around his boots. One evening, Mabel caught him. She had gotten up to use the bathroom and heard the light clink of tools. When she peeked through the open door, she found her father sanding down a wooden rail with the kind of focus he usually reserved for clockwork. She didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway until he noticed her. "You're not supposed to be awake," he said, though his voice held no bite. "What's this for?" she asked, stepping into the room. Liam hesitated, thought maybe it was time to make a real room for Rachel and Camelia, something that's theirs. Mabel looked around, then up at him. "Can I help?" He looked at her, then nodded. You can." Over the next several days, the room began to change. The walls were patched and painted a soft sage green. Liam built a bookshelf from leftover pine planks, sanding each corner so nothing would splinter. He found an old rocking chair in the basement, repainted it a pale yellow, and placed it by the window where morning light came through first. He crafted a cradle by hand, no nails sticking out, every edge smooth and rounded. He even pulled out the mobile from the attic, the one Ellen had made when Mabel was a baby, and hung it from a rafter beam, the little paper stars swaying gently above the crib. When everything was in place, he stood in the doorway with his hands on his hips, uncertain if it was enough. It wasn't grand, but it was honest, built from what he had with care. That evening after dinner, he waited until Mabel had gone upstairs and Rachel had been tucked into the bassinet. Camelia was finishing the dishes, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied back in a loose knot. Liam dried his hands and cleared his throat. "There's something I want to show you," he said. She looked over surprised. "What is it? Just come on." He led her down the hall. When he opened the door, she stepped in and stopped. Her breath caught audibly. The room was warm, softly lit, the fresh paint catching the glow of the hallway light. Her eyes moved slowly from the cradle to the chair to the bookshelf. She stepped forward and touched the edge of the crib. Her fingers trembled slightly. "You built this?" Liam nodded. "With what I had. Thought maybe you deserved more than a borrowed room." Camelia didn't answer right away. She walked slowly across the room, touching the corners, the shelves, the chair. She turned back to him, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes filled without blinking back the tears. "This is the first place in my life that's ever felt like mine." "You're not just passing through," Liam said, "at least not to us." She wiped her cheek, trying to smile. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. Later that night, after the fire had been banked and the house had gone still, Camelia sat cross-legged on the rug near the hearth, Rachel asleep in her lap. The notebook lay open beside her and a pen tapped lightly between her fingers. After a while, she began to write. The words came slowly at first, then steadier, like something old had finally found its way to the surface. When she finished, she tore the page carefully from the binding, folded it once, and walked it to the wooden box by the hearth. She placed it inside gently, almost reverently. She didn't see Liam watching from the hallway. He didn't step in, didn't say a word. He just stood there, one hand on the wall, heart steady in his chest. When she went upstairs, he crossed the room, lifted the lid of the box, and unfolded the new page. "Dear Rachel, tonight a man who owed me nothing built you a room from nothing. Not just with wood and paint and thread, but with time and patience and kindness, the kind that stays. I watched him carry you like you were always his to protect, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Peace. Maybe home isn't where you come from. Maybe it's where someone makes room for you even when they didn't plan to. Love, your grateful, tired, slowly healing mom." Liam read it twice, then folded it again and returned it to the box. The fire popped gently behind him. The cradle in the other room held the smallest heartbeat in the house, and something about that made the walls feel more like they belonged to all of them now, not just him. The change came slowly, not in a single moment, but in the quiet way that seasons shift when no one's watching. The snow didn't stop all at once, but it softened, shrinking back from the edges of the porch and the base of the trees. Drips of meltwater traced paths down the cabin's eaves, and patches of earth began to peek through, where the sun lingered longest. The cold was still there, but it no longer ruled everything. There was something lighter in the air, like the world was ready to breathe again. Inside the cabin, that same shift had begun to take shape in ways more subtle, more human. Rachel was growing quickly, her cries sharper, her smiles more intentional. She could track motion now, her eyes following Mabel with unwavering focus as the girl danced across the room or whispered stories just loud enough for the baby to hear. Camelia had started calling those moments her favorite part of the day, when Mabel sat cross-legged near the crib, inventing tales about snow foxes and forest giants, while Rachel blinked at her like she understood every word. Camelia found herself watching Rachel more lately, not just with the routine of feedings and changings, but with a gaze that lingered. She studied the curve of her daughter's fingers, the way her brow wrinkled when startled the tiny rise and fall of her chest while sleeping. It wasn't just awe, it was something heavier, something questioning. As the days grew longer and the light returned, Camelia realized the silence she had once filled with fear now held something else. A question. A whisper, what next? That thought came to her strongest one afternoon when Liam was in the back chopping wood and Mabel was upstairs folding paper cranes. Rachel had fallen asleep on her chest, warm and soft, her breath steady and slow. Camelia looked down at the baby, then out the window where the last patch of snow had just collapsed into wet soil. She asked herself not for the first time what kind of life she wanted to build, not just what she was escaping, but what she was moving toward, and whether she had the right to move at all. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she sat by the fire alone. She didn't open her notebook. Instead, she opened the old canvas folder she'd buried deep in her duffel bag when she first arrived. Inside was a folded letter printed months ago on a shared library printer she barely remembered using. It was an application for a vocational training program in Providence, a one-year course in practical nursing with support for single parents and flexible housing. She had filled it out one night when the fear of never becoming anything gnawed at her bones, but she'd never sent it. She held it now, the paper yellowing slightly at the corners, her name printed neatly at the top. She stared at the form for a long time, her finger hovering just above the signature line. There was a line asking for her current address, and she hesitated. Was she a guest? A resident? Did this place count? She'd never had a permanent mailing address since being forced out. Her chest tightened. What if they rejected her before she even had the chance to try? What if they saw single mother, no income, and tossed her file into a pile that no one touched? 100 reasons not to apply began crowding her mind until she looked at Rachel, asleep beside her tiny fingers, curled in a dream. That was reason enough. The next day at breakfast, she barely spoke. Mabel chattered about how she wanted to plant flowers when spring really came, maybe even tomatoes. Liam responded with nods and a few dry jokes, but he kept glancing at Camelia. She moved slowly. Her hands were steady, but her eyes didn't stay in one place for long. When Mabel left the table to find a sweater upstairs, Camelia finally looked at Liam. Her voice was quiet. "Do you think someone like me could start over?" He set down his fork, met her gaze. "I think you already did." Camelia exhaled a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't come from somewhere too deep for humor. "I mean, really start over. School, a job, a life I choose, one I earn." Liam nodded slowly. "You're already doing the work. Doesn't get more real than that. But what if I leave?" she asked. "What if I try and it doesn't work? What if I lose this, whatever this is?" Liam leaned forward. "Then you come back. Or you keep going. But you don't stand still, Camelia. That's not who you are anymore." That night, after Rachel had fallen asleep with her tiny fingers curled around one of Camelia's braids, she picked up her pen. This time, the words came slowly, but not from a place of hurt. They came from somewhere steadier, somewhere ready. "Dear Rachel, today, I thought about the future. Not with dread, but with a little spark. I've been scared to imagine what might come next because I didn't want to risk hoping again. But tonight, I held you and realized I want more than survival. I want to build something, not just for you, but for me. I don't know what that looks like yet. Maybe it's school. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's failing and starting again. But whatever it is, I want you to grow up watching me try. I want you to know that even if you come from a moment of crisis, you're part of a story that moved forward. You are not where I stopped. You are where I started to believe again. Love, Mom." She folded the letter, slipped it into the wooden box beside the fire, and sat for a while with her hand on the lid. Not for drama, not for reassurance, just to feel something grounded beneath her fingers. A box full of days survived, of truths recorded, of hopes whispered, and now maybe of plans being made. Outside, the last crust of snow cracked and softened. The wind was still cold, but it no longer carried the bite of isolation, just the sound of branches waking up. Somewhere in the trees, birds had begun to return, and inside the cabin, life didn't change all at once, but it was beginning to lean forward like a body ready to rise. The letter came folded neatly in a plain white envelope postmarked from Providence and smudged slightly at the corners as if it had traveled a long road. Camelia found it tucked between a grocery circular and an insurance ad on the kitchen table one Thursday morning. Mabel had fetched the mail while Liam stacked firewood. She didn't think anything of it, just handed over the pile with a shrug and skipped off to check on Rachel. Camelia opened it with steady hands but a racing heart. The letter was short, polite, and direct. She had been accepted into the program, a vocational nursing certificate course 1 year, with housing available for mothers and children. Classes began the second week of March. The date etched itself into her bones like a bell tone, both beautiful and sharp. She read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slid it back into the envelope. She didn't say anything to Liam that day, or the next. It took her 3 days to find the words. She stood in the kitchen while Liam was drying a pan, his sleeves rolled to his elbows and the back door cracked open to let in the smell of damp earth. Snow still clung to the edges of the woods, but the ground was softening, waking up slowly. Camelia wiped her hands on a dish towel and said, "I got accepted." Liam didn't look up right away. He finished what he was doing, then turned to her, calm as ever. "The program." She nodded. "Providence. Starts in a few weeks." "That's good news." "Yeah, it is." He waited, sensing there was more. "It's a big change," she said. "It comes with a room, a cot for Rachel, childcare help, classes. It's what I wanted, but it means leaving." Liam nodded slowly. "Sometimes doing what's right means leaving what's safe." Camelia looked down at the table. Her voice was small. "What if I leave and everything falls apart?" "Then you build again," he said. "Same way you did when you showed up here. You didn't quit. You didn't fold. You survived. And now you're growing. That's not failure, Camelia. That's the work." She didn't cry, but she had to sit down. That night she told Mabel. The girl was quiet for a moment, pulling at a thread on her sweater. Will you still write to me? She asked. Camelia leaned forward and touched her hand. Yes, as often as I can. And you can write back. Maybe even draw me something once in a while. Mabel looked at her. Okay, but I'm sending it with stickers, so you don't forget where it came from. Camelia laughed, full and soft. Deal. The days that followed passed both quickly and too slowly. Camelia packed in pieces. She didn't have much, just a duffel bag of clothes, Rachel's swaddles, her notebook, and a few drawings from Mabel she refused to leave behind. Liam didn't hover. He didn't ask what she needed or if she was sure. He just replaced the wiper blades on the old sedan she would be borrowing and stocked the trunk with a first aid kit and extra blankets like he had done for Mabel's first overnight school trip years before. On Camelia's last full evening at the cabin, Mabel handed her a drawing. It was of the four of them, Liam, Camelia, Mabel, and baby Rachel, standing in front of the cabin, arms linked, big red hearts drawn above their heads. So you don't forget where you started, Mabel said. Camelia hugged her tightly. I won't. I promise. That night the house was quieter than usual. Rachel had fallen asleep early, and even the fire crackled softer. Camelia sat by the hearth with her notebook. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She wrote carefully one page and folded it before she could change her mind. She tucked it into the wooden box now full of dozens of pages, a record of survival, of change, of slow becoming. Liam passed her later in the hallway. He didn't ask what she had written. He didn't have to. He nodded toward the hearth. I left one too. Camelia blinked. You did? It's nothing fancy, just a few words, but you should have something to carry with you. In the morning, before the drive, she opened the box. Mabel had added one too, her blocky handwriting carefully inked over with Liam's neater hand. Camelia read them both before she zipped her bag. Liam's read, You gave more than you took. That's not something many can say. Thank you for letting us know you. Mabel's said, You're still my family, even if your house is different now. When the car pulled up to the main road, Liam loaded her bag into the trunk, while Camelia settled Rachel in her carrier. Mabel stood beside the passenger door, holding a folded paper heart. Camelia leaned down. You okay? Mabel nodded. Are you? Getting there, Camelia said. She hugged them both. Not too long, not too tight. Just enough. Liam looked at her and said, You come back when you're ready. No one's closing the door. Camelia smiled. I know. Then she got into the car, Rachel already half asleep against her chest, and drove down the hill toward the highway. She didn't look back right away, but just before the road curved out of sight, she glanced in the mirror. Liam and Mabel still stood there, small in the rear view, two figures steady in the snowmelt morning. Camelia didn't cry, but her grip on the wheel tightened, and she whispered not to herself, but to Rachel, We're going to be okay. We're going to make something, and we'll always know where we came from. The box of letters stayed by the hearth, and somewhere down the road, more letters were already waiting to be written. The snow had long melted from the roads by the time Camelia had settled into her new rhythm in Providence. Classes were demanding, but Rachel adapted quickly to the new routine. Evenings were quieter than she was used to, the city outside a distant hum instead of the breathing stillness of the Grayfield woods. But it was working. She was doing the thing she'd promised trying, building, moving forward. Then came the call. It was just past 9 on a Thursday morning. Camelia had just dropped Rachel off at the center when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something in her chest tightened before she even answered. The voice on the other end was calm, clinical, a nurse from the Grayfield County Hospital. Are you Miss Camelia Goldwyn? We have you listed as Mr. Liam Bernard's emergency contact. Her world slowed. The voice said words like collapse, snow, congestive failure, and unconscious on arrival. Camelia nodded, answered where she could, but by the time the call ended, her hands were shaking too hard to zip her coat. She called off classes for the rest of the week, packed a small bag, and placed Rachel carefully in her carrier. Her heart pounded the entire drive back, mile after mile of highway, blurring through tears she refused to let fall. Grayfield appeared ahead, like a memory made solid, familiar trees lining the road, the curve leading home just as she had left it. She walked into the hospital with her pulse in her throat. The nurse directed her to the ICU, and when she turned the corner and saw him, Liam, pale, motionless wires snaking from beneath the blanket, to machines that beeped steadily, she stopped walking. Rachel whimpered in her arms. She stepped forward. There were no flowers, no balloons. Just the sound of machines and the white light of a hospital room that never slept. She pulled the chair closer to the bed, sat down, and stared at the face of the man who had once opened a door to a stranger without asking why. "I don't know where I belong," she said softly, not sure if he could hear her. "But I know this place never told me I didn't." She stayed, through the night, through the slow rhythm of breaths, drawn by a man who had taught her that kindness didn't require blood, didn't demand proof, just presence. The next morning, Liam stirred. Eyes fluttered, lids heavy with medication, but there was recognition there. He didn't speak, but his hand moved slightly toward the edge of the bed. Camelia took at her grip light but steady. She didn't speak either. Not yet. Later that day, as Liam drifted in and out of sleep, Mabel arrived with a neighbor. She burst into the room red-eyed and messy-haired, but determined. She climbed into the chair next to Camelia without hesitation. Rachel squealed when she saw her. "I brought your crayons," Mabel whispered. "I didn't want you to miss drawing time." Camelia smiled. "Thank you." That night, Camelia changed Liam's pillow. Mabel hummed softly beside her drawing stars on the back of an envelope. Rachel slept in her carrier, one tiny fist clenched. The storm that had knocked Liam down had passed, but what remained wasn't the wreckage, it was the rebuilding. Camelia looked around the room, then back at the man she had once feared would send her away. Instead, he had stayed, and now it was her turn. She wasn't going anywhere. It had been almost a year to the week since Camelia first stepped onto Grayfield's frozen roadside, her arms wrapped around a belly she feared would be her burden alone. Now she stood at the top of the same hill, Rachel asleep in a carrier against her chest, a small suitcase by her side, and the early spring wind brushing her curls back from her face. This time she wasn't lost. This time she wasn't escaping. She was coming home. The program in Providence had ended with little fanfare, just a handshake from the coordinator, a printed certificate, and a disposable camera snapshot with Rachel on her lap. There was no stage, no cap and gown, but there had been pride in Camelia's chest all the same. She'd done it. She hadn't just survived, she'd finished something for the first time in what felt like a very long time. But it wasn't until she sat across from the woman in the Grayfield Hospital's HR office resume in one hand and her nurse's license in the other that it finally settled in. This was real. The woman, older glasses slipping low on her nose, looked at the papers, then looked at Camelia. Her eyes paused for a second, as if placing a face. "You're the girl who sat beside Liam Bernard when he came in last winter, aren't you?" Camelia nodded, unsure if that was good or bad. "He doesn't let many people in," the woman said. "You've got good references. Welcome to Grayfield General." On her way out of the hospital, Camelia stopped at the small coffee kiosk in the lobby. The woman behind the counter glanced at her, then looked again. Recognition flickered. "You're the girl from last winter," she said flatly. Camelia nodded slowly. "I am." The woman wiped her hands on a towel. "People talk, you know. Not everyone liked the idea of him taking in a stranger." Camelia's stomach tightened. "I figured, but..." The woman poured the coffee anyway, pushed it across the counter. "You stayed, and from what I hear, you earned your place. That means something." Camelia accepted the cup with both hands. "I'm just trying to do right." The woman gave a small nod. "Well, keep doing it. Folks notice more than they admit." By the time Camelia pulled up to the cabin again, the sky was already turning soft with sunset. The trees had budded with new green, and the gravel under her tires made the familiar crunch that she hadn't realized she missed. She didn't knock. She just opened the door. Liam was sitting in his usual chair, a mug in one hand, reading glasses low on his nose. He looked up calm, no surprise, just a quiet lift of his brow. "Thought you had more city living to do," he said. Camelia smiled, stepping inside. "I did. Now I've got Grayfield healing to do." Mabel ran in from the kitchen, pausing only a second before throwing her arms around Camelia's waist. She stepped back to look at Rachel, now wide-eyed and kicking in her carrier. She got bigger. "She eats like a Bernard," Camelia said. That night they didn't talk about plans. They didn't lay out schedules. Camelia unpacked slowly. The mobile Mabel had once hung over Rachel's borrowed bassinet was still folded in the top drawer of the guest room. Camelia reassembled it and hung it over the newly cleaned crib. She wiped the windows, opened them for the first time since winter, and let fresh air fill the space. The next morning, Liam sat at the table reading the newspaper the old-fashioned way, fingers smudged with ink. Camelia handed him a mug of coffee. "I got the job," she said. "Starts next Monday. Part-time to start, but it's a foot in." Liam nodded. "You planning to stay in town then?" Camelia sat across from him, her voice even. "I'm planning to stay. Here." He didn't speak right away. Then he looked up, eyes steady. "You're not staying because you feel you owe me, are you?" "No," she said. "I'm staying because I want Rachel to grow up somewhere steady, and because this cabin, this family saved me. I want to be part of what keeps it whole." Liam exhaled the kind of breath that says more than words. Then he nodded once and went back to his paper. Later that week, Mabel drew a new picture. She handed it to Camelia shyly. 4 people, 1 cabin, and a big red heart above it. She had labeled them this time: Dad, me, Rachel, Cam. That night, Camelia tucked Rachel into bed, then walked out to the porch. The air smelled like thawed dirt and pine. She leaned on the railing, closed her eyes, and felt the stillness settle around her. She didn't need to write a letter. Not tonight. The message was already written on the walls of the room that now held her child, in the hands that had built a cradle, in the quiet nods at breakfast, in the drawings stuck to the fridge. This was what staying looked like. And this time she didn't need permission. She was home.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.